people don't know what I look like until now. Until they start going to the movies. They're gonna see my face. Big deal.
Yo, what's good? Omg Hawk, one-man gang, back at y'all with another one.
The hood get behind us, don't get nervous with me. All these L's I done took, though I deserve them, I think.
I hope everyone is well as always. I also hope everyone got to enjoy their spring break properly. The weather's finally starting to break, and I know everyone's ready to get outside and have fun. Let's all remember to stay safe, stay respectful, and drink plenty of water. If you're new to the channel, I appreciate you stopping by. If you end up liking the video, please make sure you hit the subscribe button, and I'll keep them coming. If you're a returning viewer, you already know how I feel about you. Y'all been showing crazy love. I've had some great conversations with some of y'all. Always feel free to tap in with me. Salute to the new subscribers and the day ones. I appreciate you 2 times, plus another 2, and you already know. Viewer discretion is advised. Let's get right to it. Now, I definitely recommend you check out my previous video, Page Boulevard Horror House, if you haven't already, as this is the second installment of our visit to the wonderful city of Springfield, Massachusetts. Springfield, or the City of Firsts, is where the first American gas-powered automobile was manufactured in 1895. It's also where the first Merriam-Webster dictionary was published in 1847. Springfield also happens to be the birthplace of Theodore Seuss Geisel, an author who wrote classics using the pseudonym Dr. Seuss.
Fox on clocks, on bricks and blocks.
Oh, no! He not to say that!
This time, we're going right back to the historic district of the city, to an area now known as Worthington Commons. The Upper Worthington Historic District is a collective of 4- and 3-story apartment buildings in the city's Metro Center neighborhood. I learned the buildings have what's called Georgian detail with stone trim, and some of them are over a century old, but before looking it up, I would just say they look like really cool, really old-style buildings. The whole neighborhood received a pass-through facelift upon the arrival of the casino in the summer of 2018, and right now the neighborhood visually seems like an ideal place for a summer stroll. But back in the 90s, these buildings, all of which are listed on the National Register of Historic Places, might as well have been many versions of the Carter from New Jack City.
Things, bad things, but that almighty dog gets that people don't.
Aight, let me stop. I'm being dramatic, but realistically I wasn't too far off. The buildings on and around the Worthington and Federal Street areas, as well as Taylor and Armory Streets, were as grimy as the 90s got. These were million-dollar blocks for crack cocaine and prostitution that were plagued with the plight and violence that are usually associated with the two. Now, the women in this community and surrounding areas of Springfield were especially unnerved around this time, as the number of unsolved murders of women had been steadily rising in the city, going back as far as 1990. By the fall of 1997, there had been at least 9 unsolved homicides of Springfield women, leaving area residents on high alert. Even with the heightened awareness, women were still going missing and turning up dead shortly thereafter. It was Halloween night of 1997 when 38-year-old Joanne Thomas had put her kids to bed right around 10 p.m. after an evening of holiday activities. The neighbor in the first-floor apartment underneath Joanne's later reported hearing someone scream in pain, followed by a thud coming from Joanne's apartment sometime between midnight and 12:30 a.m. Now, the following day, around 7 a.m., November 1st, Joanne's son woke up to find his mother lying on the living room couch. She had a blanket covering her body and a towel covering her head. The unimaginable would become a painful reality for Joanne's son, as he would quickly realize his mom wasn't okay and summon help. Police would confirm that Joanne Thomas had been the victim of a vicious murder the previous night. She had been positioned on the couch and her hands were bound behind her back. The living room was in disarray, and evidence of a brutal indecent assault was present, as well as male reproductive material that was found all over the place, including, but not limited to, a sock, a small vase, the carpet, and a towel. Evidence at the scene, coupled with toxicology reports, indicate Joanne had partied with someone in her apartment that night before she was brutally attacked. With no immediate leads on a suspect or eyewitnesses, Joanne Thomas's death was another woman's name added to the city's growing unsolved homicide list. Now, 3 months later, things were business as usual for a crack house located at 65 Manor Street in Springfield, in between Bay and State Streets. Now, 65 Maynard, by all accounts, could have had its own episode in the series. This spot was known to be pumping crack 24 hours a day, and was also known as a spot where sexual favors were an acceptable form of currency in exchange for crack cocaine. Prosecutors even went as far as calling it a brothel, since male customers could pull up, cop crack, arrange a date, and indulge in both right on the premises. You know, although progressive when it comes to cornering the market and satisfying customers' needs, 65 Manor Street was a nasty spot that would turn out to be a place where many would meet a grim fate. This would be the case for 38-year-old Loretta Daniels. Loretta was out working the streets as she struggled with drug and alcohol addiction and had unfortunately resorted to prostitution as a means to get by. She was known to frequent 65 Maynard regularly, as she did on the night of February 1st, 1998. Once there, she met a man, they made a deal, and left 65 Maynard together. At some point, one of Loretta's sisters ran into her and a man she wasn't familiar with walking in the neighborhood. This was the last time Loretta was seen alive. The next day, February 2nd, 1998, a man walking on State Street in Mason Square was horrified by what caught his eye. Loretta was found dead, lying in an alley by the post office. Her arms were extended over her head, still inside her sweatshirt, which had been pulled inside out and up over her face. It was determined she was strangled to death, and evidence of another brutal, indecent assault was present. Loretta was found with a sock lodged in her throat. Forensic evidence was collected from the items on scene, and Loretta Daniels was yet another victim of a brutal murder in the city of Springfield. Now, the streets were talking about a possible serial killer, and police were relentlessly following leads in attempts to stop the killings. Unfortunately, just over a week later, the vicious killer would claim another victim. 42-year-old Rosemary Downs was also a regular at 65 Manor. On February 10, 1998, Rosemary arrived at the crack spot with another man sometime around 9 p.m. The man was trying to trade a stack of CDs for crack cocaine. The pair left but came back to 65 Manor sometime around 11 p.m. before leaving again. The pair went to Rosemary's apartment on Lionel Benoit Road, where it's reported that they got high together well into the early morning hours before the man attacked her. Rosemary's son went to his mother's apartment on the evening of February 11th and found his mother dead in her bedroom. Her clothes had been pushed above her head as well. She was bound and had been strangled, but ultimately passed away from suffocation due to a sock that had been lodged in her airway. Evidence of another brutal, indecent assault was present, and evidence was collected from the scene. The situation was way past out of control at this point, as fear and panic would grip the community, and it appeared as if the police weren't anywhere closer to finding the culprit. They had ramped up patrols in the area and called in the feds, who brought in FBI profilers. A psychological profile of the suspect was developed by reviewing details of the crime. The profile said the suspect would be a man in his 30s, who worked in a detailed profession, was most likely from the neighborhood as he was able to navigate the area without standing out, and that he was most likely African American. Now, this last piece of the profile will come as a shock to many who found it hard to believe the suspect was black. Now, although time and history has taught us different, at the time the stereotype and common narrative was that serial murder was white people crime. Many dismissed the profile and considered it junk science, as tensions would continue to rise in the streets, and the people of these neighborhoods struggled with the possibility that the killer was one of their own. Now, on February 19th, 1998, a teenage girl went to the Springfield Police Department and filed a missing persons report for her mother, 37-year-old Joyce Dickerson-Peay. She woke up and realized her mother hadn't come home the night before. She went to walk the neighborhood in search of her mom and noticed her mother's car parked on the opposite side of their apartment complex off of North Branch Parkway. Now, it wasn't usual for Joyce to park there, and when her daughter approached the car, she immediately knew something was wrong, as the car had been ransacked. A small amount of blood was smeared inside, and the keys were lying on the floor. She immediately went to the police station and filed the report. Now, the next day, Springfield PD started their investigation into Joyce's disappearance. They wasted no time exhausting all available resources as search teams scoured the woods near her apartment complex and detectives canvassed the area desperately trying to find anyone with a lead on Joyce's whereabouts before she turned up another victim of the sadistic killer that had a death grip on Springfield streets. Now, although police and families searched extensively, they weren't able to locate Joyce, but fortunately, the detectives' canvassing efforts paid off as they found two women that were with Joyce the night she disappeared. Now, according to their statements to police, on February 18th, Joyce, along with one of these women, were accompanied by a man when they arrived to the other woman's apartment around 11 p.m. They all got high till they ran out of crack and decided they needed to get more. Now, I'm assuming no one in the foursome had any cash, as they all left in Joyce's car to try and trade Joyce's gold Mickey Mouse earrings for more crack. They didn't have any luck in town, so the group drove to Holyoke, Massachusetts to try and sell the earrings there. Unsuccessful again, they returned to Springfield where Joyce dropped the two women off and drove away with the man in the passenger seat. This was the last time Joyce Dickerson-Peay was seen alive. The woman identified the man they had last seen with Joyce as 31-year-old Alfred Gaynor. Alfred Gaynor was born in Springfield and lived there all his formative years. After high school, he was employed for a while as a mechanic and even worked odd jobs as a day laborer. Like many people in the late 80s and early 90s, Alfred was introduced to crack cocaine and never looked back, sending his life on a path of destruction. He was known to frequent 65 Maynard as well as the Worthington federal area for crack cocaine and prostitutes. Now, aside from this, his family had deep roots in the Indian Orchard neighborhood where Alfred was well known and not considered a dangerous individual or a menace of any type. Springfield police got Alfred Gaynor in for questioning on February 27th, 1998. In a 7-hour interrogation, Alfred gave his version of events regarding the disappearance of Joyce Dickerson-Peay. He admitted to detectives that he was with Joyce and the other two women on the night of February 18th. His account of the night's events was similar up until the point where the woman claimed Joyce drove away with Alfred in the passenger seat of her car. He told investigators that he never sat in the front seat and that when the group returned to Springfield from Holyoke, him and the two women exited Joyce's car and all parted ways. He claimed he told Joyce she should try to trade her earrings at 65 Maynard and that she drove away alone in that direction, claiming that was the last time he had seen her. Alfred said he then walked to a bar on State Street where he claimed to have a drink with a former co-worker before same said co-worker dropped him off at his girlfriend's home around 12:30 a.m. on February 19th. Detectives called his girlfriend to try and verify his statements. After discrepancies arose about the time he arrived at her house, she came to the police station at their request to answer more questions about Alfred. At one point, detectives let his girlfriend in the interrogation room, and Alfred tried to convince her he came home around 12:30, but the girlfriend still said she wasn't sure. She left and called detectives later, informing them that she was sure Alfred had came home around 6 a.m. Another witness, a friend of Alfred's, would later come forward telling investigators that Alfred came by their place around 1 a.m. that morning, asking to borrow $15, further disputing his claims of arriving at his girlfriend's around 12:30. Alfred's former co-worker denied seeing him at all that night.
Oh my God, stop. fucking lying.
Detectives asked Alfred if he would willingly provide palm and fingerprint samples, as well as blood samples, to which he agreed. After police took his prints, he was transported to Bay State Medical Center, where 4 vials of Alfred's blood were drawn for comparison to evidence found in Joyce's car. Although DNA evidence wasn't a brand new tool for investigators, the technology wasn't as advanced as it is today, and obtaining a genetic profile took weeks. This being the reason he had 4 vials of blood drawn for the testing, as opposed to today where a simple swipe of a cotton swab is all that's needed. With Joyce still missing, and no direct evidence linking Alfred to any of the homicides at the time, as unnerving as it was, police had to let Alfred go as they continued on with their investigation. An undercover detail was assigned to watch Alfred's movement 24 hours a day. Detectives were convinced he was responsible for at least Joyce's disappearance and hoped he would lead them to her whereabouts. But on March 11th, 1998, an inspector working at a building on East Columbus Avenue in Springfield made a horrifying discovery. Tragically, he found Joyce Dickerson-Peay's body hidden in some bushes on the side of the building. Her body was described as being frozen solid. Her left hand was positioned on her abdomen, and her right arm was propped up by the bush's branches. It was determined that she had been strangled to death, and again, evidence of a brutal, indecent assault was present. Now, this was a crushing blow to Joyce's family and investigators who had been hoping their efforts weren't too late. All the suspicion regarding Springfield's murdered women was directed towards Alfred, but police were still waiting on DNA test results and needed more than circumstantial evidence to obtain a warrant and secure a future conviction. Detectives would catch a break on March 16, 1998, when undercover officers assigned to conduct surveillance on Alfred Gaynor reported they watched him visit a city pawn shop. Detectives visited the pawn shop later and were shocked when they learned Alfred had pawned Joyce's gold Mickey Mouse earrings for $12.
Damn. Crap.
The same earrings the group had tried to sell in Holyoke, and the same earrings he told police Joyce had with her when she drove away. Springfield PD finally had the solid evidence they needed to directly link Alfred Gaynor to one of these murders. Police also found enough evidence to directly link him to the murder of Rosemary Downs in her Lionel Benoit Road apartment. On April 8, 1998, at 11:15 at night, police arrested Alfred Gaynor in his family's home at the Indian Orchard section of the city. He put up no resistance as he was handcuffed and taken into custody. News of an arrest hit morning headlines, leaving many with a feeling of relief as hope that the terror in Springfield was over, but also leaving many people from the neighborhoods of Springfield in disbelief, as the news that the sadistic killer was one of their own was hard to accept for many. He was arraigned the next day in Springfield District Court, where he pled not guilty and was held without bail until a pretrial hearing scheduled for April 30th. Now, during this pretrial hearing, as one of Gaynor's attorneys was in the middle of a statement for the court's record regarding the alleged extreme confinement he was being held under, Rosemary Downs' son, Eric Downs, became overwhelmed with anger when presented with the man who viciously murdered his mother. In an uncontrollable burst of rage, and without even leaving the seating area, Eric launches towards Alfred and got it rocking right there in the courtroom, sending attorneys and court personnel in a panic. He snuffed the cuffed Alfred with a hard right and grabbed the handcuffs with his left hand. Alfred tried to scurry away, but Eric stayed right with him, pummeling him with a series of right hooks and throwing him around like a rag doll all over the bench. Alfred's sister tried to stop Eric from beating her brother, but Eric managed to grab a chair from the prosecutor's table and deliver a punishing blow before a bailiff was able to pull Alfred to his feet and rush him to safety. It was reported that Alfred received minor to severe injuries in the beating. Eric ended up being charged with contempt of court and was sentenced to 60 days in jail, but I'm not sure if he had to serve that sentence. Forgive me in advance because I'm not trying to condone violence, but Eric Downs did what a lot of people say they would do but really wouldn't. Although the circumstances surrounding this moment are terribly tragic, in my humble opinion, The fact that Eric was able to strong-arm a small amount of primitive justice right there in the courthouse is noteworthy enough. The fact that it was filmed and shared with the world is just epic. Eric went viral before going viral was a thing. It was a raw and real moment capturing emotions everyone could empathize with and made for an extremely satisfying video. I was very impressed how he managed to be so precise with the chair. It's like you see him hone in and focus and bam. He made sure that one found his mark. Alfred Gaynor's attorneys had requested a change of venue. They felt that due to the publicity surrounding the case, he wouldn't get a fair trial in Hampton County. The judge obliged, but instead of being tried in Boston like he had hoped, the trial was moved to Berkshire County, and Alfred would be tried at the courthouse in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, by an all-white jury. As Alfred sat in jail awaiting trial, new developments in the investigation would finally link him to other homicides. Palm and fingerprint evidence would link him to the Halloween murder of Joanne Thomas, and when DNA test results came back, Alfred was conclusively linked not only to Joanne's murder,
DNA.
DNA linked him to the murders of Loretta Daniels, Rosemary Downs, and Joyce Dickerson-Peay. On May 20th, 2000 and nothing, Alfred Gaynor was convicted on 4 counts of first-degree murder, as well as charges for the indecent assaults, and was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms in prison. He still proclaimed his innocence as he was led off to the prison van. Now, the Springfield streets could breathe easy again for a while, as the murder stopped and the community was starting to heal, as everyone knew the man responsible for the mayhem would never see freedom again. There was still more than a handful of unsolved similar homicides from the same time period, and although everyone suspected Alfred was the culprit, he wasn't talking if he was, and without new evidence, it seemed like most of these murders would remain cold cases. In a shocking turn of events, Alfred Gaynor reached out to the Hampton County District Attorney's Office in 2008 and proposed a plea agreement in which he would confess to the unsolved murders of 5 more Springfield women, 4 of which he was suspected of but had never been charged with.
Convicted serial killer Alfred Gaynor was back in court in Springfield this morning. He pleaded guilty to murdering Vera Hallums in 1995. Gaynor was convicted of killing 4 women in the 1990s, and he pleaded guilty to 3 other murders last month.
Alfred Gaynor told the DA that in April of 1995, his first victim was 45-year-old Vera E. Hallums. Vera was found bludgeoned in her home on April 20th, 1995. Her hands were bound behind her back and her skull was broken in multiple places. Alfred told police he had walked to her house and asked her if he could sleep on her living room floor. He entered her room as she slept and beat her with a pot from the kitchen, planning to knock her unconscious to have his way with her. He said he cut cords from small appliances to tie her hands and secured the cords to her neck in a way that would restrict her breathing if she moved her hands. Vera wasn't indecently assaulted, as he claimed she passed away before he was able to do so. Alfred stole a ring from her and fled her home. Alfred also confessed to the murder of 34-year-old Ann Ermellini. Jill had been found inside the cab of an abandoned truck at an auto body yard in Indian Orchard on June 16th, 1997. Her body was badly decomposed and her identity and cause of death were determined later. Alfred told detectives as he was walking home from work, Jill was the passenger in a car that pulled up to him, and the male driver asked him if he knew where they could find crack. The 3 partied together and stopped at a store afterwards so Jill could buy some cigarettes. While Jill was in the store, Alfred picked up 2 white rocks off the ground that resembled crack cocaine. When she came back, he showed her the stones and she got in the abandoned truck with him, thinking she was about to get right. She soon realized he didn't have crack, and when Alfred made a sexual advance, Jill refused and tried to get out the truck. Alfred said he choked her until she passed out and indecently assaulted her before ending her life. Alfred also confessed to the murder of 29-year-old Robin Atkins. Robin was found in an alley next to 19 Spring Street in Springfield on October 25th, 1997. just 4 days after Jill was found and only a week before the murder of Joanne Thomas. She was partially nude, she had been strangled, her arms were bound by one of her bootlaces, and she was gagged by one of her socks that was knotted on the back of her head. A crunched up piece of paper was found lodged in her airway as well. Alfred said he had partied with Robin and another man, and they had all parted ways before he coincidentally bumped into Robin by herself later that night. He again pretended he had more crack, and Robin joined him in the alley. When she realized there was no crack, she turned to leave, and Alfred attacked her from behind. Alfred also confessed to the murder of his longtime girlfriend, 33-year-old Yvette Torres. Yvette was tragically found by her 11-year-old son. Her body was found positioned against the bathroom floor of her Healy Street apartment on November 15th, 1997, just 2 weeks after the murder of Joanne Thomas in her Worthington Street apartment. Alfred confessed to indecently assaulting Yvette and strangling her to death in her bathroom before stealing a VCR and other items he would later trade for crack. By November 2010, in 2 separate hearings, Alfred Gaynor pled guilty to these 4 additional murders. Massachusetts doesn't have the death penalty, and Alfred wouldn't receive any additional prison time considering he was already serving 4 consecutive life sentences and would never see life outside the Massachusetts prison system again. He's currently located at MCI Norfolk in Norfolk, Massachusetts. Many people wondered why Alfred decided to confess after all these years, as it wouldn't reduce his sentence, and he previously doubled down on his claims of innocence when convicted in May of 2000. In a 2008 interview with the district attorney, Alfred claimed he was sorry for what he did and again blamed the crack. He was quoted saying, "I know it's hard to understand, but I truly am a good person." Now, Alfred said he hadn't confessed earlier because he didn't want to hurt his mother, who had since died in 2006. He was quoted saying, "I just couldn't destroy everything she believed in." It'd be nice to believe that now, since Alfred's mother passed on, he was ready to tell the truth in order to bring closure to the victims' grieving families, but many question his true motive, considering his only condition of his plea agreement was that a new trial be granted for his nephew, Paul Fickling. On a hot summer day of July 11th, 1996, Springfield PD was called to conduct a welfare check at 280 Dwight Street Extension. 20-year-old Amy Smith and her 22-month-old daughter, Destiny Smith, hadn't been seen or heard from in days, and concerns started to grow. Responding officers were able to make entry and found Amy and Destiny both deceased in the apartment. Amy's body was stuffed in a closet with her legs protruding out, and a stroller and some other items were thrown on top of her. She had been indecently assaulted and strangled, and the sock was found lodged in her throat. It appeared she had been dead for about a week or so. Destiny was found lying on a mattress on the floor, close to her mother. She was fully clothed and had no apparent injuries. It was later confirmed that 22-month-old Destiny passed away due to a combination of dehydration and starvation. Records indicate the apartment doors were locked, as well as the windows, which all had their shades pulled down. Evidence would later prove Destiny spent days locked in the sweltering apartment with her deceased mother. CSI found Destiny's little fingerprints all over the bottom of the refrigerator, where she tried but wasn't strong enough to open the door. Police were investigating the scene when a man came rushing through the police tape demanding to know if his ex-girlfriend and daughter were okay. He was brought to the station for questioning. A then 19-year-old Paul Fickling initially gave conflicting statements to police, eventually confessing a couple times with different variations. He claimed he and another individual, we're gonna call B, murdered Amy and left her and Destiny in the apartment on July 5th, 1997, 6 days before the horrifying discovery. He told police he got into an argument with Amy that got physical before he left the apartment briefly, after which he returned to find B, assaulting Amy before placing her in the closet. He was convicted of 2 counts of murder and sentenced to life in 1997. Allegedly, B was overheard bragging about the murders, but he was never tried as no conclusive evidence would place him there. In 2008, along with the other 4 murders he had confessed to, Alfred Gaynor claimed sole responsibility for the deaths of Amy and Destiny Smith. Alfred said he was drinking and smoking crack excessively on July 3rd, 1996. He knew Amy through Paul and his sister and decided to stop by her apartment to borrow money for more rock. He claims Amy let him inside but told him she didn't have any money, only food stamps. He asked for those too, which she said no, so he sat on a bed and played with Destiny while talking to Amy. He told the DA, quote, "I felt the food stamps were my last resort for currency to get high." He started pulling the cord on the overhead light, flicking it on and off as he waited for the perfect time to, quote, "flick the lights off and do what I did." He claims he then attacked Amy from behind before taking her food stamps and fleeing the apartment. He said he sold the $79 in food stamps for $40 and purchased more crack. One major discrepancy in Alfred's version is that he claims he left the apartment door cracked open because, quote, he didn't want the baby to die. But police found the deadbolt locked when they arrived 8 days after he claims to have done it. Many details of Amy's murder, such as the sock and other aspects, are very similar to his other murders. He hasn't been officially charged at this time. Now, Paul and Alfred were housed together in prison for a while in the early 2000s. They both alleged they never spoke of their crimes with each other. Now, due to Alfred's plea agreement, Paul was granted a new trial in February of 2010, but surprisingly on October 18, 2010, Paul Fickling pled guilty to manslaughter charges for the deaths of Amy and Destiny Smith. Paul admitted to the district attorney that him and Alfred went to Amy's apartment together on her last night alive. He claimed after getting into an argument with Amy and assaulting her, Alfred joined in on the attack before she was strangled and left in the closet. He claims his uncle Alfred was abusive and bullied him his entire life as they lived in the same home, and that he was afraid for his life as well. If this count is the truth, besides watching his uncle murder this child's mother and leaving his baby to starve, his silence would leave Alfred free to murder at least 7 more women. Paul Fickling was sentenced to 19 to 20 years in prison, 14 of which he had already served by the time of his sentencing in 2010. DNA tests would later reveal that Paul Fickling was not Destiny's father. That doesn't make it any better for me, but if it does for you, I'm not mad at that. All these women lost their lives in atrocious ways, but Destiny... Learning about the last days of 22-month-old Destiny Smith's short life have truly left me heartbroken and angry. I wish I could tell her how sorry I am. I'll never forget about you, Destiny, I promise. Before I go any further, my sincere condolences to the family and friends of Vera E. Hallums, Jill Ann Ermellini, Robin Atkins, Joanne Thomas, Yvette Torres, Loretta Daniels, Rosemary Downs, Joyce Dickerson-Peay, and Amy Smith. Despite whatever their personal demons were, they were all mothers remembered for having beautiful souls and spirits. Alfred Gaynor's crimes were depraved and despicable. There were many details I chose to leave out, and many that I had to. Each of the murders and assaults were carried out with a level of sadism and viciousness that is hard to imagine a human being is capable of. Alfred would later blame his crimes on alcohol abuse and crack rage. I'm sure it attributed. It's crazy thinking about this unhinged man prowling Springfield streets at odd hours, pager walking top speed block to block in search of another rock, all the while knowing that the next woman out there with the misfortune of crossing paths with him would potentially meet a gruesome end if they didn't have enough crack to keep him content. Alfred later said that crack was his first and last love.
I now pronounce us man and wife. You may kiss the bride.
In the year 2000, before Alfred had been convicted of any murders, a small stone monument was placed in Court Square. It reads, "Slain Sisters of the Community," with a list of 12 names memorializing women who were murdered in Springfield the previous decade. At the time of his dedication, all of the murders were unsolved. Alfred Gaynor would later be convicted of 6 of these murders. 2 more of these women's murders were committed by other men who were later convicted, but 4 of these women's murders still remain unsolved to this day. 17-year-old Shauna Price, found murdered in Blunt Park on December 26, 1990. 21-year-old Lisa De Silva, found murdered in her Tracy Street home on April 21st, 1991. 32-year-old Corinne Lee, found murdered and left behind 63 Central Street on May 25th, 1992. And 24-year-old Celestina Perez, found murdered in Gurdonville Park on June 2nd, 1995. Some people speculate that Alfred is responsible for some of these murders. Many of the details are eerily similar to the details of crimes we know he committed, so I'm sure it's a possibility. And you never know, someone might remember something one day, put 2 and 2 together, and provide some information that brings closure to one of these women's families. I think what makes Springfield unique and why I decided to call this a part 2 is strictly based off geography and the unique community that was targeted by these predators. Many people can vividly remember the tensions both Alfred Gaynor and Stuart Weldon spread through the same tree-lined Springfield streets. Some people knew victims of both these monsters. Springfield had an omen, an almost 30-year epidemic of brutal homicides of its mothers, sisters, and daughters. The trauma it caused the city and left their many loved ones to deal with will continue on for decades more. Rest in peace to all the beautiful slain sisters of Springfield, and my sincere condolences to everyone affected. If you're still here, I appreciate you so much. Please make sure you hit the subscribe button, and I'll keep bringing you these cases. Much love to the whole Springfield, everybody for real, from the Tower to Worthington, Maple, High Street, Chestnut, Federal, Taylor, Lincoln, Linden, Armory, Knox, shit, who else? Main Street, like past the 2000 block by the Green Bakery, Bay Street, State Street, Eastern, Pearl, Belmont, Bergen, Bristol, Plainfield, Sycamore, Saratoga, North Branch, the whole Springfield, everybody from Indian Orchard to Forest Park, I love y'all for real. Drop y'all street or complex in the comments if I missed y'all. Just please keep it respectful. It's all love over here. Everyone, please stay well and stay safe. Until next time, One Man Gang.